I still remember the way the room smelled that evening, like leftover Chinese takeout, and the faint musk of the old couch we'd bought together from IKEA years ago. I was sitting there scrolling mindlessly on my phone, not because I was looking for anything in particular, but because silence made me uneasy back then. It was too sharp, too honest, too capable of peeling back layers I wasn't ready to look at. That was the backdrop of my marriage in the months before everything came crashing down. A kind of stillness that felt like decay, though I couldn't admit it to myself at the time. My name's Daniel Whitaker. I'm from Ohio originally, but I'd been living in Pittsburgh for most of my adult life. I was 34 when this whole story began to unravel. Just a normal guy with a steady job, a wife, a mortgage, and the quiet kind of dreams that most people carry around like a folded receipt in their back pocket. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I thought I was stable. I thought that counted for something. When I met Hannah. She was 26, working as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm. We'd locked eyes at a friend's party, one of those 4th of July backyard things, where someone's uncle was burning burgers on the grill and a cooler of cheap beer was the centerpiece of the evening. She had this laugh that cut through the smoke and music. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to be the reason for it. I guess you could say I fell for her in that cliché way people always talk about, hard, fast, without thinking about what would happen if the ground wasn't there to catch me. We dated for a couple of years before getting married. The wedding was nothing grand, just a modest ceremony in a converted barn outside the city. Friends, family, mason jars with fairy lights, the Pinterest dream on a budget. And at the time I thought that was perfect. I thought we didn't need much as long as we had each other. For a while, that felt true. We built a life that, from the outside, looked steady. We bought a little house in the suburbs. It's one of those neighborhoods where every lawn was trimmed just enough to show that people cared, but not so much that it looked like Stepford. I worked as an IT project manager at a local hospital. Hannah kept on with her design job. We weren't rolling in money, but we weren't struggling either. We had a rhythm weekdays filled with work, gym sessions that we half committed to, weekends with friends or Netflix marathons. Ordinary, comfortable, maybe too comfortable. Though I didn't see that then, the first cracks showed themselves in subtle ways. Looking back, I can almost pinpoint the moments, though at the time they felt insignificant. Like when she started coming home later from work, shrugging it off as deadlines. Or when she'd pull her phone closer to her chest when a notification popped up. I'd ask harmlessly who it was, and she'd just say, "Oh, just work stuff," with that little dismissive wave. I wanted to believe her, and so I did. I've always been the kind of person who avoids confrontation. Growing up, my dad was the sort of man who could turn a disagreement about dinner into a shouting match that echoed through the walls. I swore to myself I'd never be like that, so I leaned hard in the opposite direction, choosing peace. Even if it meant swallowing doubts. Hannah knew that about me. She used to tell me that's what she loved most, that I was calm, steady, someone she could lean on. But I wonder now if what started as love eventually turned into something else. Maybe boredom. Maybe contempt. Or maybe she just craved a chaos I couldn't give her. The real turning point, the moment I should have paid attention, happened in the fall of 2018. We'd gone to a friend's wedding in Philadelphia. It was one of those over-the-top events with a 12-piece band and an open bar that seemed like it had no bottom. Hannah was radiant that night, in this deep green dress that clung to her in all the right ways. I remember dancing with her, feeling like the luckiest guy in the room. But later, when I stepped outside to get some air, I caught a glimpse of her inside, laughing just a little too hard at something another man had said. His hand brushed her arm as if it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't anything incriminating, not really. Just a fleeting moment, but it burrowed into me like a splinter. On the drive home, I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things, that she was just being her sociable self. But something about her laughter that night it felt different. Not the kind she reserved for me, of course. I buried that feeling. Told myself not to be paranoid. I mean, marriages go through phases, right? That's what everyone says. So I kept playing my part, the dependable husband. The guy who brought flowers on random Tuesdays. The one who handled the leaky faucet and the tax forms. But the distance grew. Slowly at first, like two trains drifting apart on parallel tracks. She stopped asking me about my day, stopped reaching for me in bed. Our conversation shrank into logistical exchanges, grocery lists, schedules, bills. I told myself it was just the stress of adulthood. Everyone hits rough patches. By early 2019, though, I couldn't ignore the gut feeling anymore. She was spending more nights out with coworkers. She started dressing differently, too more polished. It's more effort than she'd ever cared to put in before heading to a casual dinner. I remember once catching a glimpse of her reflection as she adjusted her lipstick in the mirror. She looked at herself with a kind of anticipation I hadn't seen in years. And it wasn't for me. I wish I could say I confronted her then, that I had the courage to ask the hard questions. But I didn't. I convinced myself that pressing her would only push her further away. So I waited, hoping things would somehow right themselves. There's a particular night etched into my memory. It was April 2019. Game of Thrones was airing its final season, and we were supposed to watch it together. I had picked up takeout from her favorite Thai place, eager for a simple night in. But she texted me last minute saying she was stuck at work. I ate alone, scrolling Twitter, watching everyone live tweet the episode. Hours later, I saw a photo pop up on Facebook her at a bar downtown. Drink in hand with a group of people I didn't recognize. She looked happy. Too happy. That night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan. I felt the weight of something I couldn't yet name pressing down on me. Betrayal? Maybe. Or just the beginning of the end. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt hollow. But here's the thing. I still loved her. Pathetically, desperately, I loved her. And that love made me blind. I clung to the hope that if I just held on long enough, if I just proved myself enough, she'd come back to me. The irony is, when the truth finally came out, it wasn't in some dramatic reveal. It wasn't me catching her red-handed or stumbling across damning evidence. It was her indifference, her laughter, and it shattered me in a way I never thought possible. Looking back now, I can see the threads unraveling long before that night. The signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs. But I ignored them, telling myself stories to make the silence less unbearable. That's the thing about denial, it's not loud. It's quiet. It's the gentle voice that tells you everything's fine, even as the walls are caving in, and by the time I finally admitted the truth to myself, I was already standing on the edge of the cliff, about to be shoved off. It was a Tuesday night in May of 2019 when everything finally collapsed. Funny how these monumental shifts in your life don't happen with fireworks or ominous music. They happen in the middle of the week, when you're least expecting it. When you've still got leftovers in the fridge and emails you haven't replied to. I came home from work later than usual that day. The hospital IT department had been rolling out a new software update, and it was chaos. Like trying to change the tires on a car while it's speeding down the highway. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was close to 9. The house was dark, but Hannah's car was there. I walked in quietly, thinking she might already be asleep, but she wasn't. She was sitting in the living room, curled up on the couch, her phone glowing in her hands. She didn't even notice me at first. I stood there, taking in the sight of her legs tucked under her, hair pulled back, this small smile playing on her lips as she typed something quickly. When she finally looked up and saw me, she jumped slightly, almost guilty, before plastering on a casual expression. "Hey," she said, too lightly. "Long day?" I muttered something about work, but my eyes stayed on her phone. She placed it face down on the armrest, as if that would erase the tension already thick in the air. I told myself to let it go, but something inside me cracked open. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was all those tiny suspicions I'd swallowed for months. But the words came out before I could stop them. I asked her who she had been smiling at. She rolled her eyes, gave this exasperated laugh, and said it was just a friend from work, that I was being paranoid. But the way her cheeks flushed, the way her tone sharpened, wasn't the kind of reaction you give when you've got nothing to hide. I didn't push it further that night, but sleep didn't come. I lay awake next to her, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, wondering if she was dreaming about me or about him. The following weekend, I decided I couldn't keep pretending. I told myself I'd just check. Not in a snooping, jealous way, but in a desperate, searching for truth way. She had left her phone on the nightstand while she was in the shower, and my hands trembled as I picked it up. I knew her passcode IT had always been the same, her birthday. For a second I hesitated, hearing my mother's voice in my head from years ago, telling me that trust was the foundation of marriage. But hadn't that foundation already cracked? When the screen unlocked, it felt like I was opening Pandora's box at first. I didn't see much work emails, texts from her mom, group chats with friends. But then I found the thread. His name was Mark, a coworker apparently. The messages weren't explicit at the start, just inside jokes, late-night banter. But as I scrolled, the tone shifted. Compliments about how beautiful she looked in a certain dress. Mentions of last night and next time. And then photos. Not nude, but intimate enough, her leaning against a bar. Eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. Selfies with him at restaurants she'd told me she was too tired to go to. My chest felt like it was caving in. I read message after message, my vision blurring with tears I didn't even realize were falling. At one point, there was a line that seared itself into my memory. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. I don't know how much longer we can keep sneaking around like this. I put the phone down, as if it had burned me. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the bed just to steady myself. I could hear the water running in the bathroom, the sound of her humming softly, oblivious. And there I was, sitting in our bedroom surrounded by the ghost of a marriage that no longer existed. When she came out, towel wrapped around her, she saw me sitting there, pale and rigid. She froze for a second before her eyes darted to the nightstand. She knew. God, she knew instantly. I asked her, my voice breaking, how long it had been going on. And do you know what she did? She laughed. Not nervously, not out of shock, but this sharp, almost cruel laugh. She looked at me like I was pathetic, like my tears were some kind of performance. It's not a big deal, Daniel, she said, waving her hand dismissively. You're overreacting. Don't be so dramatic. Those words sliced me deeper than the messages had, because in that moment, she wasn't even sorry. She didn't care that she had ripped my world apart. She just minimized it. Laughed at my pain like it was something ridiculous. I felt the tears streaming down my face, and I hated myself for it. I hated how small I felt, how powerless. I begged her to tell me the truth, to just give me something real to hold on to. But all she did was roll her eyes, grab her phone, and walk out of the room. That night, I sat in the dark living room until dawn, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it all. My mind replayed every moment of our marriage, every smile, every kiss, every promise. Were they all lies? Or had she loved me once and just stopped? The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions at work, plastering on a fake smile, answering emails, sitting in meetings, all while my insides were unraveling. At night, Hannah would act like nothing had happened. She'd scroll on her phone, laugh at some meme, ask if I wanted anything from the fridge. I couldn't comprehend how she could be so unaffected while I was breaking apart piece by piece. I confided in my friend Kyle one evening. We'd been close since college, and he was the kind of guy who never sugarcoated anything. When I told him what had happened, he shook his head and said, "Man, she doesn't respect you anymore. If she can laugh at your pain, she's already gone." His words stung because they were true. I wanted to fight for my marriage, but how do you fight for something when the other person has already left the battlefield? One night, a week after discovering the messages, I tried to talk to her again. I told her I couldn't live in limbo, that we needed to decide what was happening to us. She didn't even look up from her phone when she said, "Maybe you should just accept that this isn't working anymore." That was it. No tears, no remorse. Just cold indifference. I remember going into the bathroom afterward, locking the door, and collapsing on the floor. I cried harder than I ever had in my life. My chest hurt from sobbing, my face pressed against the cool tile. And the worst part wasn't just the betrayal, it was her laughter. It echoed in my head, mocking me, turning my grief into something small and laughable. That was the breaking point. Not the affair itself, but the way she responded to my pain. The way she made me feel like I was less than human for caring. The following morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a hollow chest, but something inside me had shifted. The man who had begged her to love him again was gone. What replaced him was quieter, colder, but steadier. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. I was standing on the edge of something I didn't yet understand. I didn't know if it was freedom or destruction waiting on the other side, but I knew I had to jump. People think the worst part of an affair is the discovery, that single moment when the truth explodes in your hands like a grenade. But for me, the real pain was in the days and weeks after. It was the slow erosion of everything I thought I knew. The way life became unrecognizable, even though all the furniture was still in the same place. I moved through those days like a ghost. Work became my refuge, not because I liked it, but because it was somewhere to be. The hospital was chaotic, buzzing with the usual mix of crises and minor disasters. I buried myself in tickets and project updates, staying late under the glow of my monitor just to avoid going home. But no matter how late I stayed, eventually I had to return to that house. To the woman who once felt like home and now felt like a stranger, Hannah didn't leave right away. In fact, for a while it was as though she expected nothing to change. She still came and went as she pleased, still laughed at her phone. Still called me babe absent-mindedly when she wanted something. She had this uncanny ability to compartmentalize, to carry on, as if nothing catastrophic had happened. Meanwhile, I was unraveling. I started losing weight. Not intentionally, food just lost its appeal. My favorite chicken wings from Smoking Joe's tasted like ash. My morning coffee didn't wake me up anymore. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake next to her, the silence like a scream in my ears. She'd roll over, phone screen lighting up her face, fingers tapping out messages to someone who wasn't me. I tried therapy. The hospital had an employee assistance program, and I booked a few sessions with a counselor named Marlene. She was kind, in that professional way therapists are kind. But it was like trying to bandage a wound while the knife was still in me. She told me I had to set boundaries, to decide what I could live with. I nodded, but inside I felt paralyzed. There's a particular day from that time that's burned into my memory. It was June 8th, 2019, a Saturday. I'd agreed to help my friend Kyle move into his new apartment downtown. Lifting boxes and hauling furniture felt good, like a distraction. But when I came back to our house, Hannah was gone. Not unusual, except she'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I don't know why I looked. Maybe I was past caring about the ethics of it. Maybe I wanted confirmation of what I already knew. Her email was open flight confirmations, hotel bookings, dinner reservations. Chicago, for a weekend in July. A boutique hotel in River North. A place I'd once talked about staying at with her when we could afford to splurge. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Not only was she still seeing him, she was planning trips. Our shared life, our inside jokes. Our little dreams, she was now living them out with someone else. I closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The sun was setting outside, throwing long orange streaks across the walls. I felt like I was watching my own life from the outside, like a bad indie film where the protagonist is too pathetic to leave. That night, she came home. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask where she'd been. I just went upstairs, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. They looked foreign to meet these hands that had built our furniture, cooked her dinners, held her when she cried. Now they just sat there, empty. The days blurred after that. I started drinking more, not heavily, but enough to take the edge off. Whiskey became a quiet companion in the evenings. I'd pour a glass, sit on the back porch, and watch the neighbors' kids play in their yard, their laughter carried on the summer breeze. Life went on all around me, but I felt like I was fading out of my own story. My family knew something was wrong. My sister Rachel called me one night, her voice full of concern. I wanted to tell her everything, to unload it all, but the words stuck in my throat. There's a strange shame in being cheated on, as if their betrayal is somehow your failure. I told her I was just stressed from work. She didn't believe me, but she let it go. The tension at home grew unbearable. We'd barely speak, moving around each other like ghosts in a haunted house. The air was thick with unspoken things. Every time she left the room, I'd feel this mix of relief and dread. Relief because I didn't have to see her. Dread because I knew she was probably with him. Then came the night she didn't come home at all. It was late June, a Thursday. She'd said she was working late, but midnight came and went. At 2 a.m., she still wasn't home. I sat on the couch, the glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the walls. My phone sat on the coffee table, silent. At 3:15, I heard her car pull up. She came in smelling like expensive cologne and hotel soap, not mine. She didn't even try to explain. Just walked past me, went upstairs and shut the door. Something inside me snapped then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet shift. The man who'd been waiting, hoping, pleading, was gone. In his place was someone who'd finally realized he was drowning and needed to climb out of the water. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. Her name was Lisa Friedman, recommended by a coworker who'd gone through something similar. She had this no-nonsense tone, the kind that makes you feel like maybe you're not completely lost after all. She told me what documents to gather, what steps to take. I hung up the phone feeling both sick and strangely lighter. When I told Hannah later that week that I'd spoken to a lawyer, she didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. She just shrugged and said, "If that's what you want." That was it. No fight, no apology. Just indifference. We agreed she'd move out once the paperwork started. She went to stay with a friend, or at least, that's what she said. I didn't care anymore. The house felt emptier without her, but also less suffocating. I could breathe again, even if every breath still hurt. The divorce process was a blur of signatures and bank statements. Pennsylvania law required a waiting period. So for months we were technically still married, even though everything between us was dead. She kept seeing Mark I knew because mutual friends whispered about it because social media posts slipped through. Each one felt like another little cut, but by then the wound was numb. I focused on survival. Therapy, work, small routines. I started running in the mornings, even though I hated running. There was something about the steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement, the way my lungs burned, that felt like proof I was still alive. I also reconnected with people I'd neglected during my marriage. Old college friends, coworkers I'd brushed off. They didn't know the details, but their presence reminded me that my world wasn't entirely empty. Still, nights were hard. The loneliness hit differently after years of sharing a bed. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The 4th of July party, where we'd met. The vows we'd exchanged under fairy lights. The way she'd laughed at my tears. I wondered if I'd ever trust anyone again. If I'd ever be more than the guy whose wife cheated on him. The final court date for our divorce was December 12th, 2019. It was snowing lightly that morning. Flakes clinging to my coat as I walked up the courthouse steps. Hannah was already inside, sitting with Marquez. She'd actually brought him. I felt a flash of anger, then nothing. Just emptiness. When the judge finalized everything, it felt surreal. Years of my life reduced to a few signatures and a gavel strike. Hannah didn't look at me as we left. She just walked out with him, her hand brushing his arm the way it used to brush mine. I stood on the courthouse steps, snow falling around me. And for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not the gut-wrenching sobs of before, but a quiet, steady stream of tears. It was grief, yes, but also release. The fallout of her affair had burned my life to the ground. But as I stood there in the cold, I realized something. The ground was clear now, and maybe, just maybe, I could build something new on it. The months after the divorce were strange, like waking up in a city you didn't recognize, but were forced to navigate anyway. I'd spent so long in a fog of betrayal and heartbreak that suddenly being free felt disorienting. There were no alarms going off in my chest, no whispered taunts from her laughter, in my head just silence. And in that silence, I began to understand something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Power. Not the kind of power that comes from hurting someone. but the kind that comes from reclaiming your life. I realized I had spent years building a life not for me, but around someone who didn't value it toward me. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. It started small. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, throwing out every item that carried her scent or memory. The photo frames we'd bought together, gone. The candles she loved, gone. Her favorite throw pillow, the one she insisted made the couch look better, gone. The physical space became mine again, and with it, my mind began to feel lighter. I took up running seriously. Not just the casual jogs I had tried to use as therapy before, but long distance, early mornings in the freezing Pittsburgh air, the city slowly waking around me. The rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement became meditative, almost spiritual. I'd listen to podcasts about personal growth, watch interviews of people who had reinvented themselves after disasters, and feel like I was learning a new language, the language of self-worth. Work became my next focus. I had always been competent, but after the divorce, I threw myself into projects with an intensity I hadn't known I possessed. I spearheaded a hospital-wide software overhaul, staying late, mentoring new hires, building a reputation not just as a reliable IT manager, but as someone indispensable. Each small victory at work was a reminder that I was capable, that I mattered, that I could build something from scratch and make it thrive. I also rebuilt my social life. Friends I had neglected suddenly became central to my recovery. Kyle was still there, of course, but I started seeing more of Rachel, reconnecting with coworkers I respected, even meeting new people through running clubs and volunteering. Human connection became a lifeline, reminding me that life didn't stop with betrayal, it could start again. It's better than before. Then came the part I hadn't anticipated, dating again. I hadn't planned it, didn't expect to feel ready. But one evening in February 2020, I met Emily at a charity gala. She was sharp, funny, and kind, in a way that didn't feel performative. Her laugh was soft, genuine, and unlike Hannah's, it didn't cut it healed. I was cautious at first, guarded. I didn't want to hand my heart to anyone so quickly. But Emily was patient. She listened when I talked about work, about my hobbies. Even about my divorce, but she never pried for more than I wanted to share. There was a subtle strength in her presence, a quiet confidence that made me feel safe for the first time in years. By summer, we were officially together. It was a slow, natural progression, nothing rushed, nothing forced. I remember one afternoon in July 2020, sitting on a park bench by the river in Shenley Park, watching the sun glitter on the water, and feeling a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in over a decade. Emily was there, teasing me about my terrible taste in music, and I laughed, truly laughed without any shadow behind it. Meanwhile, I learned about Hannah's life after me, not from her. Not from gossip, but through mutual acquaintances and social media. Mark had moved on too. She had no steady job anymore, no close friends nearby, and the people she leaned on seemed fleeting, unreliable. Her laughter, once sharp and dismissive toward me, had turned hollow. Posting filtered smiles on Instagram that barely masked the chaos. Underneath "I won't leave," there was a part of me that felt vindicated. Not in a malicious sense, but in a quiet satisfaction. I had been the one who had been crushed, humiliated, and yet here I was, building something real, something enduring. She had chosen indifference, cruelty, and betrayal. I had chosen life, growth, and love that mattered. There was a turning point that truly cemented this feeling. It was late October 2020. Emily and I had been dating for a few months and had rented a small cabin outside of Ohiopyle for the weekend. The air was crisp with autumn, leaves in shades of amber and crimson carpeting the forest floor. I woke up early, brewed coffee, and sat on the porch, watching the morning mist lift off the river. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Emily joined me, holding a mug and wrapping her scarf around my neck playfully. "You're up early," she said. "I like mornings," I replied, smiling. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. I wasn't running from pain anymore. I was running toward something. Toward happiness. Toward love that wasn't conditional or toxic. toward a life I had reclaimed. I also realized something crucial about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Hannah. It wasn't about proving anything to her. True revenge, I learned, was in my own life. It was in building a life she couldn't touch, couldn't mock, couldn't diminish. Every smile, every laugh, every step forward was a quiet, unshakable form of victory. I started a side project. Something I'd always wanted to do but never had the confidence for. Small consultancy, helping local businesses upgrade their IT systems. It was risky, yes, and it took hours beyond my full-time job, but it was mine. The clients were grateful, the work fulfilling, and every completed project reminded me that I was competent, capable, and in control of my destiny by the time 2021 rolled around. I felt almost unrecognizable compared to the man who had sat on that living room floor, phone in hand, shattered by betrayal. I was stronger, wiser, and surprisingly content. Emily and I had grown closer, and I realized I could love again without fear, without paranoia. Without the crushing insecurity that had dominated my marriage with Hannah, I also learned to forgive in my own way. Not her, she hadn't earned it, but myself, for waiting too long, for doubting my instincts, for letting someone else's betrayal define my self-worth. That forgiveness was liberating. It allowed me to move fully into my new life without the shadow of the past constantly looming over me. And so, when I finally looked back at Hannah, I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. I understood that some people enter your life to teach you, to challenge you, to hurt you even, so you can rise stronger. She had been that painful lesson, and I had passed it with my dignity intact, my heart slowly healing. In a future bright with possibility. By the spring of 2021, Emily and I had moved in together. Our apartment was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture, books lining the shelves, and photos of our travels scattered around. Every morning I woke up and felt grateful not for the easy days, but for surviving the hard ones. Every evening, I went to bed feeling a quiet pride in the life I had rebuilt. I didn't need anyone to acknowledge my triumph. I didn't need Hannah to regret her choices or feel the sting she had caused me. My revenge wasn't public. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, intimate, and unassailable. I was happy, truly happy, and that was more than enough. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, almost imperceptible thought would surface every now and then. The woman who once laughed at my pain, who betrayed my love, who walked away without a backward glance, she was alone, completely. And there was nothing I could do to change that. Nothing, that is, except continue living my life better than she ever imagined I could. It's strange the way life has a way of balancing itself out, not in some cosmic, flashy way, but in quiet, almost imperceptible increments. By 2022, I was living a life that, at one point, I could never have imagined for myself. Not just surviving, not just existing in the shadow of betrayal, but thriving. I was genuinely happy, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by the past. Emily and I had settled into a rhythm. She had this amazing ability to make ordinary moments, extraordinary making coffee in the morning, feel like a ritual. Folding laundry into a shared game. Even grocery shopping became something fun rather than a mundane task. She understood the value of kindness, patience, and listening, and she brought a warmth into my life that I hadn't realized I was missing for so long. We had started talking seriously about the future marriage. Children, perhaps even a home with a little backyard garden. I felt a sense of stability that was both comforting and exhilarating. Every decision we made together was deliberate, mutual, and full of care. Contrast that with the chaos of my past marriage, and the difference was staggering. I had learned what real partnership looked like. I had learned that it was worth waiting for. During this time, Hannah faded into the periphery of my life. I would occasionally hear bits and pieces, mutual acquaintances, mentioning her unstable career, a failed relationship, her struggles to maintain friendships, but it didn't anger me anymore. The sting of betrayal had dulled into a neutral observation. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. And mine was filled with genuine love, laughter, and respect. There's a subtle satisfaction in knowing that your life has become a quiet kind of revenge. It's not about posting pictures or broadcasting your happiness. It's about living fully in a way that she cannot touch, cannot mock, cannot diminish. I had become everything she could never be for me, everything she could never give me. And the fact that she could see it whether consciously or not was enough. One evening, the summer of 2022, Emily and I decided to take a short trip to Lake Erie. We rented a small cabin near Presque Isle. In the first night, we sat on the deck watching the sunset. The sky was painted in streaks of orange, purple, and pink, and the water mirrored it perfectly. I took her hand, and she leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace and completeness that I had once thought was impossible. I thought back to the man I had been just a few years ago, the man who had cried on the living room floor, whose world had been ripped apart by betrayal and laughter. I remembered the helplessness, the nights of despair, the hollow pain that seemed impossible to escape. And then I realized how far I had come. That version of me was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I had reclaimed my life in a way that was subtle, intimate, and unshakable. There's a strange irony in it. For years I had thought that happiness was something she had the power to give or take from me. That night on the deck, I understood that it never was. Happiness, true happiness, had always been mine to earn, to nurture, and to protect. She could try to take it with betrayal, but it was rooted too deep. And that was my revenge, not a spectacle, not a confrontation, but a life fully lived by the fall of 2022. Emily and I had moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Pittsburgh. The walls were painted with colors we chose together, each room a reflection of our personalities and shared vision. I had converted my old home office into a dedicated space for my consultancy. Now thriving with local clients who valued my expertise and reliability, I was busy, challenged, and fulfilled in a way I hadn't been in years. One day, while sipping coffee and scrolling through local news, I saw a small article about a woman struggling with job instability, highlighting someone who matched Hannah's description. I didn't linger. I didn't feel the old pangs of anger or jealousy. I felt only a quiet acknowledgement. She was alone, and it was the result of her choices. She had chosen her path, I had chosen mine, and mine was rich with love, respect, and fulfillment. The past still lingers, of course. Memories of betrayal, of laughter at my pain, of broken trust, they surface now and then. But they no longer define me. They are reminders, like scars, of a life I survived and a life I rebuilt. I remember those nights vividly, the despair, the loneliness, the deep-seated feeling of being worthless. But I also remember the turning point, the first run, where I felt the burn in my lungs and thought, I am alive, and I will not let this defeat me. That's when the transformation truly began. I reflect often on what I learned from this experience. I learned that betrayal doesn't have to break you permanently. I learned that revenge isn't about hurting the other person, it's about reclaiming your power, dignity, and happiness. I learned that true love, the kind that endures, is patient, kind, and mutually nourishing. And I learned that the person you used to be, the one who is broken, can emerge stronger, wiser, and capable of creating a life more beautiful than you ever imagined. Now, in 2025, Emily and I are happily married. Our wedding was small, intimate, and filled with love, the kind that didn't need to impress anyone but ourselves. Friends and family gathered, laughter flowed freely. For the first time in my life, I felt secure in the love that surrounded me. It was a stark contrast to the hollow, performative marriage I had endured before. I sometimes think about Hannah, not often, but occasionally. I imagine the loneliness, the hollow achievements, the absence of someone who truly cares for you. I don't gloat. I don't wish her pain. I simply acknowledge that her life is hers, and mine is mine, and mine is good. Really good. The kind of happiness that can't be taken away, can't be mocked, can't be diminished. I live with intention now. Every choice, every decision is mine to make. I wake up grateful for Emily, for my health, for the life I rebuilt from ruins. I run every morning. I work with purpose. I laugh freely, I love fully. And when I catch a glimpse of my reflection, I see someone unrecognizable from the broken man who cried over betrayal. Strong, resilient, fulfilled, and at peace. The final quiet revenge was never meant to be seen. It doesn't require headlines, social media posts, or anyone's validation. It's in living a life that's so full, so joyful, and so genuine that no shadow of the past can touch it. I've become everything I was meant to be, and in doing so, I've left the pain, the betrayal, and the laughter that once hurt me far behind. And that, I realize, is freedom.